Hello humans! Today I wanted to talk about this guy right here. This is obviously a cjrb pyrite Bowie. The cjrb pyrite is at this point a certifiable legend in its space. It's certainly one of the new legends amongst pocket knives, fitting very comfortably into the same place as the Wee Knives Banter and the Civivi Elementum. There are a couple others up there, but those are probably the ones that come most to mind. Yeah, this is a verifiable take on a legend, but I have had this guy for about 6 months now, and I do have some of my own thoughts and opinions on it. So, without further ado, let's get into this. So, obviously, the pyrite version of the Bowie is a little bit different from the regular version of the Bowie. The regular version of the Bowie, the regular version of the pyrite Bowie, the regular version of the pyrite is, of course, a drop point blade, featuring either a hole or thumb studs for deployment. There is also the Bowie, or the Pyrite Alt, with the sort of reverse Tontos shaped blade. I haven't played with that one. I have played with a regular Pyrite. It's pretty good. It's very, very simple. This does have a couple of things about it that are quite a bit different, and I do think are worth noting. So, first thing first, obviously with the Bowie shape, we have a very aggressive clip point, which leads to this being a very good puncturing tool. It's very thin behind the edge, behind the tip I should say, as you can see, and also it's not a very broad tip, which means that for puncturing tasks, getting into like feed bags, stuff like that, this thing handles it beautifully. Cutting apart cardboard boxes, it does a really good job on, all of which is really nice. The other thing that specifically the Bowie versions of the Pyrite have is this fuller, which one, makes a really nice deployment, and two, just adds to the overall like classical aesthetic of this particular blade. That, coupled with the fact that they have bolster versions, they do have front and back bolster versions. There was none of those in stock at the time when I saw them, and I believe that they are primarily on the more premium versions. This is the more budget version with the AR-RPM steel. AR-RPM, complicated stuff, but to make a long story short, it is a spray-form version of 9CR18 MOV, which is roughly in between 440B and 440C in terms of many of its qualities. It is, of course, a very good, it's a complicated thing, right? In a budget steel, it does do a good job. I have had some people who I know have a lot of issues with AR-RPM. AR-RPM 9, I think. Yeah, AR-RPM 9. I have had some people who've had quite a few issues with it, especially if you get a blade that is on the higher end of the Rockwell spectrum. cjrb likes to hit 59 to 61. As soon as you're in those higher RPM, or higher Rockwell hardnesses, you start to have problems, I find, with it being a little bit chippy. Especially because this is very thin behind the edge. Like, it's not a thick boy behind the edge, which means that if you're doing any type of twisting or even light prying, some of the harder ones will end up with chunks taken out of them. I have not had this issue with this particular blade. I would imagine this one here is closer to 60, just given how it performs compared to other, again, 9CR18 MOV blades that I have at different Rockwells. I think that that's more or less where it is. It feels pretty run-of-the-mill. It doesn't feel particularly chippy, but it also doesn't feel particularly soft. Not that the average user is going to find much of a difference between any of those three. It's just words to note, right? But yeah, AR-RPM 9, they have now replaced it with a more premium steel for a lot of their new releases, but knives like this are still coming with the AR-RPM 9 blade steel. And you know what? I think it works. It does work quite well. It holds an edge okay because this is under $100, right? At House of Knives. So for the price, not upset about it. Not upset about it at all. We have a stainless steel bolster coupled with ebony wood scales and a folded steel pocket clip. The action on this is pretty good for the opening. The detent feels just right for because this is a regular plunge lock, button lock. But what I will say is after about 3 months, it developed a little bit of stick. Not super bad, but unless I like go out of my way to flick it lightly, there is just a little bit of stick to it, which can be a little bit annoying. Yeah, not the end of the world, like I said, but it can be a little bit annoying. This finger choil area up here is a little bit small in my opinion. I don't use it very often. It is more of like a fingertip choil, just because anything past that, you're right up on the heel of that edge. So for any harder use stuff, I actually do prefer to stay a little bit back and just work a bit ahead. And to that end, I actually do wish that the jimping back here was extended just a little bit further. It's not in the bad spot by any means, it just makes me feel very far behind the blade. If I'm using the tip, this is perfect. If I'm trying to do like any wood carving or anything like that, I just end up wishing there was a bit more out here. For draw cuts and the like, the Bowie blade shape is actually incredibly nice because of the fact that you can get your index finger very easily right up by the belly of the blade. It means that for draw cuts or if you're doing like skinning style tasks, this is incredibly nice. You can follow a contour very easily. You can take just the top edge off very, very easily, which I like. Another thing that I'm a huge fan of is the edge shape. Straight line, followed by belly with a pointy tip. That is, beyond a doubt, my absolute favorite blade shape. There are some that have, belly starting right out at the heel, and that's not bad. I just like having a little bit of straight edge for those wood carving tasks that I do end up having. So, to that end, it is quite nice. Some of cjrb's and Artisan Cutlery's button locks have had issues with, falling apart, essentially. They end up being fairly light locks. I have had no issues with this over the 6 months. It has never become unlocked on me. The lock has never failed. It's perfectly fine to that end. So I can't say that will be the case for all pyrites, but I have never had an issue with it. Deep carry pocket clip, one side only pocket clip, which is kind of disappointing, especially because it's not like, you can actually see there, it's not that it's milled into the contoured scale, they just opted not to for whatever reason. Which is kind of disappointing. This is in fact equally easy to use with the, I never reverse flick with this side, yeah. It is equally easy to use with the left hand, with the left hand. So just give them a pocket clip, it doesn't hurt anybody. It's not like having two holes instead of one matters. But that's kind of all I have to say on that. Lanyard hole. No real opinion about that. This knife is big enough that I don't feel it needs a lanyard. If it were a little bit shorter, the mini pyrites especially, I would probably put a lanyard on just because they are so short. But for a knife in this size class, I don't think it has an issue. Speaking of size class, let's do size comparisons. Here it is next to a Wee Knives Banter and a Civivi Chevalier. As you can see, it fits quite comfortably in between those two knives. And here it is next to a Buck 110 and a Zippo lighter. So as you can see, quite a bit smaller than the Buck 110, making this very comfortably what I consider to be a mid-sized knife. In terms of thickness, or a good deal thicker than the Buck, or thinner, I should say, than the Buck 110. And it'll be a little bit thicker than the Zippo. Yeah, but not by much. It is a little bit thicker than the Zippo. Alright, blade stock thickness. We have a flat grind, of course. Alright. We are sitting at, right back here. Functionally 100 thousandths, which is 2.6 millimeters. All right. I mean, it does definitely feel very slicey. I wasn't expecting it to be that thin. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think a big part of why it doesn't feel that thin in use is because it is only a saber height grind. But, I mean, full props to them. It does slice well, and being that thin is fairly impressive. So I am actually a little bit surprised by that. Yeah. This is a nice little knife. Everybody will always say that. I am going to go ahead and say I think that the Bowie version of the pyrite is the best of the three options, because of the fact that you do get the belly and you have that pointier tip. The drop point version is a phenomenal knife, do not get me wrong, but I do feel that you miss out on, in particular, just having that really, really pointy tip and that really good finger point for those draw cuts and that kind of a thing. The alt version, I'm not a huge fan of reverse tontos. I don't think that you get enough belly with it in particular. You do get a nice straight edge, which I do appreciate, but I do just think that in terms of having kind of the best combination of elements, the Bowie version is what comes out on top. Couple that with having, like, don't get me wrong, you can absolutely reverse flick off of the thumb studs, and that is fine to do, but having something a little bit lower than the thumb studs that makes it really easy to reverse flick, and the thumb studs for your traditional thumb flick just make such a brilliant combination. It just mixes up your deployment methods a little bit better. Obviously, there are non-bolstered versions, there are bolstered versions. I like bolsters. I think they look really good, so this is going to draw me even more to the Bowie version in particular, which I believe is the only version that has... I'm not 100% on that. I haven't looked recently, but I know that this is the version that has bolsters. Action's pretty good. Like I said, it did develop a little bit of lock stick. Not entirely sure what that's about, but it's not the end of the world. It's not like it's difficult to open as a result of that. So that is fine. And this punctures the best out of, because like I said, I have played with the drop point versions, and this just punctures better in the drop point version. So for opening feed bags, for opening stuff up, it just does a better job. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, I'm really fond of this. I do think that it is highly recommendable, especially being a budget knife. It is under that $100 Canadian price point. It is highly recommendable. What I will say, Bowie blades are generally speaking seen as more aggressive. It can make it difficult to carry this knife amongst polite company, which sucks because this is a really good looking knife in my opinion. But that is kind of the biggest drawback to it. Yeah, that's kind of all I had to say. This is a nice little knife, definitely worth picking up. Definitely, if you're only looking at like one knife option, something, the Pyrite family is a phenomenal place to go, and I would go for the Bowie specifically. Stay safe and have fun out there.